Adam Simpson stood in the center of the vast Imperial Hall, his posture rigid, his face a carefully maintained mask of defiance. Before him, seated atop an obsidian throne carved with the sigils of conquered worlds, was Emperor Karvek Zolith of the Zelzorid Empire. His golden eyes, slit like a serpent's, bore into the human diplomat with amused contempt. The air hummed with tension, the vast chamber filled with the silent weight of a dozen high-ranking officials and military commanders. Adam took a slow breath, choosing his words with precision. "I am here as a courtesy," he said, his voice steady. "Humanity has no interest in war. But if you do not turn your fleet back from our borders, you will regret it." Laughter rippled through the hall. The reaction was immediate and expected. The Zelzorth, the oldest and most powerful empire in the known galaxy, saw humanity as nothing more than a young, impudent race, barely worth acknowledging. Their fleets had crushed civilizations that had stood for millennia. Compared to them, Earth was an infant playing at war. High Commander Volek Syth leaned forward, the sharp ridges of his pale blue face catching the dim light. "Regret it?" His lips curled. "Do you truly believe your kind can stand against the might of the Empire? That your pitiful fleets, your laughable technology, could do anything but be swept aside?" Adam met his gaze unwavering. "This isn't a warning," he said, each word deliberate. "It's an opportunity. Turn back now, because when the fighting starts, there won't be a second chance." The Emperor's voice, rich and deep, silenced the murmurs. "I find your arrogance fascinating, human," Karvek Zolith said, fingers drumming idly against the arm of his throne. "You believe yourselves dangerous, yet you have done nothing to prove it. Where are your war fleets? Where is this great power you claim to wield?" Adam exhaled through his nose. They still didn't understand. "You assume because you do not see our strength, we do not have it." His voice dropped, the weight of certainty behind it. "That mistake will cost you everything." Volek chuckled, shaking his head. "Enough of this. Emperor, with your permission, I will take the fleet and raise their homeworld. The humans are weak. Let's rid ourselves of their delusions." Karvek tilted his head, considering. "Very well. You may proceed." Adam closed his eyes for half a second, disappointment flickering beneath his calm. He had done his duty. Humanity had given them a choice. They had chosen poorly. He turned sharply on his heel and strode from the chamber, his heart steady, his mind already preparing for what was to come. As Adam's shuttle lifted from the Imperial Palace, the Zelzorth fleet prepared for war. The Imperial Armada, 500 warships strong, gathered in the vast reaches of space. Flagships the size of cities, bristling with weapons capable of reducing planets to rubble, stood ready. At their center was Volek Syth's personal battleship, the Dominion's Wrath, an immense dreadnought that had crushed fleets many times larger than humanity's entire military force. Standing on the bridge, Volek watched as the final battle formations locked into place. Around him, officers moved with quiet efficiency, their confidence unshaken. "Any sign of resistance from the humans?" he asked. A communications officer checked the latest scans. "None, sir. No fleet movements, no defensive structures deployed. Their borders are empty." Volek smirked. "Cowards. They know they are beaten." Grand Admiral Drosk Vyyn, a veteran strategist, observed the readouts with mild curiosity. "It is strange," he admitted. "Humans are unpredictable, yet they offer no resistance." He glanced at Volek. "You do not find that odd?" Volek exhaled, rolling his shoulders. Their arrogance has finally been crushed by reality. They see our power and understand they are doomed. He turned toward the main viewport, where the stars stretched in endless, quiet beauty. "We will strike at their core. Earth will burn before they even muster a response." The fleet surged forward, slipping into FTL transit, streaking toward humanity's homeworld. The journey was smooth, effortless. 500 warships, an unstoppable force moving toward an inevitable victory. But as they neared Earth's system, something shifted. The first sign was subtle. On the bridge of the Dominion's Wrath, a technician frowned at his console. "Sir, we're detecting fluctuations." Volek turned. "Fluctuations?" The technician hesitated. "Unusual energy signatures. Spatial distortions. It's as if," he paused, adjusting his instruments. "It's as if something is here, but not here." Volek scoffed. "Phantom signals. Ignore them." Grand Admiral VYNN, less dismissive, studied the data more closely. The readings were erratic, strange. "Are there any ships in the area?" The sensor officer ran a deep scan. "Negative, sir. No visible vessels. No stations. Just empty space." And yet the anomaly remained. The fleet pressed forward, cutting deeper into human territory. Then, without warning, the lead warships vanished. One moment, they were there, powerful engines burning, their forms filling the void. Then they were gone. No explosion, no debris, just gone. Volek bolted upright. What the hell just happened? The bridge erupted into motion, officers scrambling for answers. Reports flooded in from across the fleet, ships disappearing without a trace. Panic laced the voices over the comms. "We've lost the Ravager. The Hellfire is gone. No distress signal, nothing." Admiral VYNN clenched his jaw. "This is not possible." Then the communications came through, not from their own forces, but from deep within the void itself. A single transmission, cutting through every Imperial channel, its voice smooth, unshaken. "You should have listened. Adam Simpson." Volek's blood ran cold. The anomalies, the strange readings, the sudden disappearances. It wasn't a coincidence. It wasn't a malfunction. It was humanity. And they had been waiting. The silence that followed Adam's transmission was heavier than the vacuum of space itself. Every Zelzorith officer aboard the Dominion's Wrath stood frozen, eyes darting between their instruments and the blackness beyond. The bridge's hollow display flickered with the outlines of their vast fleet, but the red markers representing the missing warships were increasing at an impossible rate. They weren't being destroyed. They weren't being jammed. They were simply ceasing to exist. Volek SYTH gritted his teeth, his grip tightening on the console before him. "Full stop," he barked. "Lock down all systems. I want a full analysis of what's happening." His voice remained steady, but deep inside, something gnawed at him, an unfamiliar sensation clawing at the edges of his mind. Uncertainty. Admiral Dross Voynen's fingers danced over the control panel as he manually accessed the ship's external feeds, bypassing automated processing. He needed raw data. The answer had to be there, hidden within the cold, sterile numbers. But what he saw sent an involuntary shudder through him. "The space around us," VYNN hesitated. "It's not empty." Volek spun toward him. "Explain." VYNN magnified the last recorded frames of the missing warships. The image was distorted, but barely perceptible within the cosmic haze were faint, shifting patterns. Ripples in the void, like disturbances on the surface of a dark ocean. Shadows that weren't cast by any physical object. "There's something out there," VYNN murmured. "A presence, undetectable by conventional scans. Something that was waiting for us." Volek refused to believe it. "That's impossible. If they had weapons of this scale, we would have known." "They wanted you to think that," came a voice from the ship's main display. The transmission was clear, untraceable, as if the voice were speaking from the bridge itself. Adam Simpson's face materialized, his expression unreadable. His suit was no longer the pristine diplomatic attire he had worn before the Emperor, but a matte black tactical uniform with no insignia. His eyes, once full of careful diplomacy, now held something far colder. "You were so confident," Adam continued, his tone calm, almost pitying. "So certain that humanity was a species to be conquered. And yet, here you are, unable to even see the weapon that will end you." Volek's hands curled into fists. "What are you playing at, human?" Adam tilted his head slightly, as if considering how much to reveal. Then he simply said, "This." The lights on the bridge flickered. The Dominion's raft shuddered, not from an impact, but something far more insidious. Its system seizing, its power draining. The same reports echoed from every remaining ship in the fleet. The displays dimmed, and for the first time in Volek's long military career, he realized what true powerlessness felt like. A whisper of motion flickered outside the viewport. At first, it seemed like an illusion, the afterimage of distant starlight. Then, the shadows coalesced and impossibilities took shape. A fleet, not just a fleet. An armada that dwarfed the might of the Zelzoreth. Their ships did not shine with the harsh metallic glow of Imperial warships. Instead, they moved like phantoms, their surfaces shifting between the visible and the unseen, their edges blurred as if reality itself struggled to define them. They had been there the entire time, hidden just beyond perception. The Phantom Fleet. Isaac Renner sat aboard the bridge of the UNS Valkyrie, the spearhead of humanity's unseen force. His expression was one of quiet satisfaction, the product of years of preparation finally culminating in a single, decisive moment. His crew remained silent, waiting on his command. Every officer on board had been trained for this, facing an enemy that thought itself untouchable. They still don't get it, Renner mused as he watched the chaos unfold. All this power, all this arrogance, and they still don't understand what just happened. His second-in-command, Lieutenant Calloway, allowed himself a tight smirk. "Shall we educate them, sir?" Renner leaned forward, voice smooth, unhurried. Fire. Across the Phantom Fleet, silent lances of light erupted into the void, weapons far beyond the comprehension of the Empire. No energy trails, no conventional missiles, just pinpoint devastation. Zelzoreth warships collapsing on themselves as their molecular bonds unraveled, their hulls simply ceasing to hold together. Explosions did not bloom in space. Instead, the affected vessels seemed to dissolve, their once impervious armor turning to dust before vanishing completely. On the Dominion's raft, Volek watched in horror as ship after ship disappeared. This wasn't warfare. It was annihilation. "This isn't possible," one of his officers shouted, panic breaking the rigid discipline of the bridge. "They have no mass readings, no energy signatures, no—" His voice cut off as the Dominion's raft jolted violently. "They've locked onto us," VYNN breathed. Adam's voice returned, impassive. "You had your chance." Volek refused to accept it. He refused to let everything end like this. "Full forward assault," he commanded. "Focus fire on their largest vessel. Overload weapons if you have to." The Dominion's raft and the few remaining ships of the Zelzoreth fleet fired in desperation, unleashing every ounce of destructive power they had. Their weapons passed through empty space. Renner smiled faintly as he observed. "They're still trying," he noted. "Admirable, in a way." The Phantom Fleet moved with eerie grace, shifting in and out of perception untouchable. They were not bound by the conventional laws of engagement. Every Zelzoreth counterattack struck nothing but echoes of where the human ships had once been. Volek's hands trembled. His warriors, his empire's finest, were helpless. He had mocked the humans for their invisibility, their lack of presence, but now, as his fleet crumbled, he realized his mistake. They had not been absent. They had been watching. Adam's voice was the final nail in the coffin. "The difference between us, Volek, is that you fight for conquest. We fight for survival. That means we don't just prepare for war. We prepare to end it before it begins." Renner raised a hand. "Shut them down." The Phantom Fleet sent out an invisible pulse, and every remaining Zelzoreth ship flickered. Their engines sputtered, their weapon systems died, and their communications severed. Not through brute force, not through damage, but through control. The Phantom Fleet had rewritten their existence. All that remained was silence. The great Zelzoreth Armada, 500 ships strong, had been erased in minutes. Volek sat back in his chair, his mind racing, his breath coming shallow. There was no retaliation. There was no counterstrike. They had already lost before the first shot was fired. Adam's voice was soft now. "I tried to warn you." Then the transmission cut. The last thing Volek saw before his ship's systems collapsed completely was the shifting outline of the Phantom Fleet, fading once more into nothingness. They were not invaders. They were not conquerors. They were shadows. And they had already won. The Zorth Prime, the heart of the Zelzorth Empire, had never known silence. It had always been a symphony of military power. Warships docking, fleets mobilizing, strategic transmissions crackling across the void. Now, that silence was absolute, a hollow, suffocating void. Volek Syth stood rigid on the bridge of the Dominion's wrath, his gaze locked on the swirling marble of the Zelzorth homeworld below. His ship, once the pride of the Imperial Armada, drifted powerless, held in the unseen grip of humanity's Phantom Fleet. The few remaining vessels of the once mighty Zelzorth navy hung beside it, gutted, empty shells. Their weapons were disabled, their defenses overwritten, their fates sealed. Admiral Dross VYNN was slumped in his chair, his hands steepled against his forehead, his breathing slow and deliberate. The man who had once commanded conquest without equal had been reduced to a spectator of his own downfall. "We underestimated them," he murmured at last, his voice hoarse, exhausted. "All this time, we thought ourselves the apex. We thought them beneath us." Volek said nothing. The truth had been burned into his mind with each disappearing warship, each futile order, each impossible demonstration of power. Humanity had not risen to meet them in battle. Humanity had not fought a war. They had executed a sentence. The main view screen flickered to life, unbidden. The image of Emperor Karvek Zolith appeared, seated in his throne room, his usually impassive expression darkened with something Volek had never seen before. Fear. "Volek." The Emperor's voice carried none of its usual weight. "Report." Volek exhaled slowly, steadying himself. He wanted to frame it as a battle, a tactical miscalculation, something that could be salvaged. But there was nothing left to salvage. "The fleet is gone," he said, forcing himself to meet the Emperor's gaze. "Not destroyed, not in retreat. Gone." The silence stretched long and unbroken. Then, from the void, a voice cut through the Imperial channels. "You were given a choice." Adam Simpson stood aboard the UNS Valkyrie, watching as the final remnants of the Empire trembled beneath their own arrogance. He had delivered the warning, and they had laughed. Now, there was no laughter, no mockery. There was only understanding, hollow and too late. The Phantom Fleet did not loom over Zorth Prime like an occupying force. It did not posture. It simply existed, waiting in the unseen spaces, as it always had. The Empire's eyes were blind to it, their weapons useless against it. The Emperor straightened, summoning whatever dignity he could muster. "What are your demands?" Adam tilted his head slightly, as if amused by the question. "Demands?" He glanced toward Commander Isaac Renner, who stood beside him, arms crossed, gaze impassive. Then he turned back to the transmission. "You assume this is a negotiation." The Emperor's golden eyes flickered with something dangerous. "You think because you have the power to destroy us, you can dictate the fate of my people." Adam leaned forward. "You misunderstand. We aren't here to dictate anything. We're here to end an era. On the surface of Zorth Prime, sirens howled to the capital city of Zelvoris. Imperial officials ran to the corridors of their once impenetrable bastion, scrambling to secure what little authority they had left. Panic rippled through the streets. The citizens of the Empire, who had only ever known their rulers as untouchable, now saw them desperate, afraid. Humanity had not fired a single shot at the planet. They hadn't needed to. Across the Empire, outposts and colonies received the same transmission. The Zelzorth fleet had been erased. The capital world stood defenseless. There was no external enemy to fight, no battlefield on which to prove their superiority. The war had not ended in combat. It had ended in inevitability. Grand Admiral VYNN finally rose from his chair, shoulders squared despite the weight pressing upon him. "What happens now?" he asked, his voice measured. "You have your victory. What will you do with it?" Adam considered him for a moment before responding. "That depends entirely on the Empire." A new voice crackled into the open channel. "The Empire is finished." The transmission came from an unexpected source, one of the Emperor's own High Chancellors. A second voice followed, then a third, across Zorith Prime. The realization was spreading like wildfire. Without its military might, the Empire was a hollow structure propped up by fear alone, and fear had lost its teeth. The Emperor's expression darkened as he listened to the voices of his own people turning against him. He had ruled through power, through dominance. But power was only as strong as its ability to enforce. And there was no enforcement left. Valak turned to VYNN, jaw clenched. "If we surrender, they could wipe us out entirely." VYNN shook his head. "If they wanted us extinct, they wouldn't be speaking to us now." He looked toward the view screen. "They are not us, Valak. And that is precisely why they won." The Emperor's hands curled into fists, his body trembling with restrained fury. "I will not." The transmission cut out. The throne room's lights flickered and died. The people of Zorith Prime watched as their Emperor, their rulers, their entire chain of command vanished from their screens, their communications, their networks. Not by an explosion, not by a coup, by something far quieter, far more precise. The Phantom Fleet had severed the Empire's head from its body with the press of a button. Aboard the UNS Valkyrie, Renner exhaled, watching the data stream confirming the complete neutralization of the Empire's command structure. "It's done," he said quietly. Adam nodded. "The Empire is broken. The galaxy will decide what comes next. There would be no occupation, no vengeful slaughter. Humanity had done what it needed to do, not to conquer, but to ensure the Zelzorth never threatened them again." Adam turned to Renner. "Initiate withdrawal." One by one, the Phantom Fleet faded once more into the void. Ships vanished from perception, slipping back into the unseen corners of space, leaving behind only the shattered remnants of an empire that had thought itself invincible. Zorith Prime's skies were clear. There was no enemy in sight. Yet the Empire would never be the same again, and as the last of humanity's vessels disappeared, the final message was broadcast across every world that had once feared the Zelzorth's rule. This was not war. This was not conquest. This was a lesson. The Empire had learned it too late. The galaxy, however, had just begun to listen. The Phantom Fleet was gone. The last of humanity's vessels had faded into the unseen void, vanishing as effortlessly as they had appeared. Yet their presence remained, an indelible scar carved into the fabric of the galaxy. The Zelzorth Empire, once the most feared power among the stars, lay in ruin, not by fire, not by conquest, but by something far worse: irrelevance. The Emperor was gone. His high command had been severed, their authority collapsing like brittle glass. For the first time in thousands of years, the great empire had no ruler, no structure, no guiding hand to wield its once unstoppable might. The absence of warships in its skies spoke louder than any fleet ever could. And the people, those who had cowered beneath the weight of imperial rule, those who had lived their lives knowing nothing but subjugation and the certainty of the empire's supremacy, had been forced to see the truth. Their gods had bled. Valak Syth stood in the ruined halls of the imperial palace, his boots echoing through corridors once crowded with dignitaries and strategists. The opulence of the throne room was meaningless now, its grandiose carvings and ancient banners remnants of a past that no longer held weight. There were no guards standing at attention, no commanders waiting for orders. The power they had all worshipped was dust in the wind. Drosk VYNN stood beside him, his uniform disheveled, his face lined with exhaustion. "They left," he muttered, shaking his head as he glanced toward the sky. They had every opportunity to crush us, to take our worlds as spoils. And they left. Volek didn't answer. He had asked himself the same question, over and over, since the moment the Phantom Fleet disappeared. If humanity had truly wanted revenge, they could have burned Zorth Prime to the ground. They could have wiped every Zelzorth colony from existence. They had the technology, the capability, the power to unmake everything the Empire had built over millennia. And yet, they had chosen restraint. That thought unsettled him more than their overwhelming might. A conqueror could be understood. A tyrant could be predicted. But an enemy that delivered absolute defeat and then walked away, that was something far more dangerous. They don't need to rule us, Volek said finally, his voice quiet. They already won. VYNN exhaled, staring out over the shattered remnants of the capital city. Then what happens now? It was a question without an answer. Or rather, a question with too many answers. The Empire had ruled through dominance, but now there was nothing left to enforce it. The warlords who had once held systems in check were scrambling for power. Governors, once content in their absolute obedience, now whispered of independence. The outer colonies, long neglected in favor of military expansion, had begun severing their ties. The Empire was no longer an empire. It was a carcass waiting for scavengers. Across the galaxy, the repercussions of humanity's victory rippled outward in shockwaves. The other great powers, once fearful of provoking the Zelzorth, were now silent, hesitant, waiting. Humanity had never been considered a galactic superpower. It had been treated as an upstart species, an ambitious but ultimately inconsequential civilization with no right to claim a seat at the table of history. Now, the table had been overturned. On the bridge of the UNS Valkyrie, Adam Simpson observed the vastness of space, arms crossed, mind still sharp with the weight of what had transpired. The mission had been executed flawlessly. The Phantom Fleet had functioned exactly as it was meant to, an unseen hand, guiding the fall of an empire without the need for prolonged war. Every Zelzorth warship that had crossed the border had been erased. Every avenue of retaliation had been severed. And yet, there was no satisfaction in the victory. Commander Isaac Renner studied him for a moment before breaking the silence. "You're not celebrating." Adam didn't look away from the viewport. This wasn't a celebration. Renner nodded slowly, stepping beside him. "You knew this would happen," he said. "The moment they ignored the warning, you knew." Adam exhaled. They thought strength was about what could be seen, about the size of their fleets, the weight of their presence. His gaze darkened. They never considered the things beyond sight. Renner watched the stars for a long moment before speaking again. "The rest of the galaxy will want answers." "They'll get them," Adam said, his voice measured. "Humanity has never been one for posturing, but they'll understand what happened here. They'll understand what happens when we're threatened." A soft chime interrupted the conversation. A message, sent across every galactic communication channel, appearing simultaneously in every government stronghold, every spacefaring civilization, every broadcast hub from one end of known space to the other. The statement was short, devoid of flourish, a simple declaration. Humanity will not be threatened. We are not conquerors, but we will never be prey. The words burned into the galactic psyche, a reminder, a warning. The Zelzorth had been the strongest, the untouchable force that none had dared challenge. And they had fallen without a single planet being invaded, without a single conventional war being fought. The message was clear. There were no more illusions. Renner let out a slow breath, folding his arms. "And if someone else doesn't take the hint?" Adam finally turned away from the viewport, his expression unreadable. "Then they make the same mistake." In the remains of the Zelzorth Empire, a new order was beginning to take shape. Warlords rose and fell in a matter of days. Old alliances crumbled. New factions emerged. The species that had once ruled through absolute dominance now turned on itself, uncertain, divided. The very foundation of the empire had been shattered, not by weapons, not by brute force, but by an idea. The idea that they were no longer the most powerful force in the galaxy. That knowledge alone was enough to dismantle them. On Zorith Prime, Volek Syth watched as entire systems declared independence, as once loyal generals vanished into the void, seeking refuge in unknown corners of space. He knew, without a doubt, that the Empire would never rise again. But one thought lingered, gnawing at him in the quiet moments. They had never truly seen the Phantom Fleet, not with their own eyes. They had only seen the destruction left in its wake. If this was the power humanity had chosen to reveal, what else remained in the shadows? The Zelzorth had learned their lesson too late. The rest of the galaxy would have only one chance to understand it. And if they didn't, they would never see their end coming.